Hello everyone, let's get started. Welcome to the Sustainable Asia Pacific International Forum, sponsored by AGES. Welcome. So we have been having this conference for almost a week, and today is the last day, and this is the last session of the last day. So I hope you fully enjoy this session. Now, this session is about the expectations and challenges for international cooperation to tackle plastic pollution. So we have the co-sponsors between the IGES and the Environmental Restoration Conservation Agency. So before we actually get started with the session, we would like to have Mr. Takahashi, the Executive Director of IGES, to say a few words. Hello, everyone. I am Takahashi, Director of AGES. I would like to say a few words at the opening of this session. This session is co-sponsored by the Environmental Restoration Conservation Agency. And last year, as an attempt to internationally disseminate research results funded by the Ministry of Environment's Environmental Research, a General Promotion Fund, the organization planned a session at the ISAP 2021, and in response to this, we decided to hold a session on major themes jointly with AGES this year, including an introduction to research funded by foundation. The theme includes the marine plastic waste, and this was something that will be part of the agenda, was the part of the agenda in 2019 G20 Osaka, where Japan assumed the post of the presidency and the chair. In our efforts, we will further promote the understanding of the wide-ranging waste problem, take into consideration the creation of a circular economy type economic society, and work as a comprehensive countermeasure while establishing an international cooperative system. I think it's important to go. Look forward to in-depth discussion from this perspective day. One more time, I would like to thank everyone who is joining us for this session and to give us the presentations. I hope this session is a meaningful one for everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Takahashi. Again, in recent years, as Director Takahashi said, this plastic issue has been gaining much attention in the international arena. So especially in regards to promoting the international cooperation towards this, we believe the international community is going towards reaching some kind of a global agreement. And last week, there was an international negotiation conference in Uruguay to reach that particular agreement. So again, we are in a stage where the international community is beginning to unite in the fight against the plastic pollution. So in this session, we would like to speak and present about how much the scientific data and research have contributed to solving this problem, and also the peripheral researches surrounding this problem. So through this, we can gain the bird's eye picture of this problem, and from the perspective of NGOs and the government and the other businesses, we would like to discuss how we can further promote the international collaboration. Now, the fastest speaker in this year, OECD just published a very dramatic report called the Global Plastic Outlook, in talking about the plastic problem, as well as moving towards circular economy, and what the issues and challenges are, and what steps we may be able to take going forward. So this is a very good report that gives you an overall picture of this topic. So we have Mr. Agrawala, who led the effort and process of writing and publishing this report. So Mr. Agrawala, please give us your presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Dr. Hotta, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to speak before you today. I'm going to share my screen now. So I hope you can all see my screen. So as Dr. Hotta mentioned, we published the Global Plastics Outlook. It was published in 2 volumes earlier this year. And I'm going to draw on some of the key messages from both reports in my presentation today on pathways to ending plastic leakage to the environment. So just to give you a bird's eye view of how interest in the problem of plastic pollution has grown over the years, this is just a tracking of the keyword plastic pollution using Google Trends from 2004 to the end of 2021. And you can see that there was some level of baseline interest throughout in plastic pollution, but it peaked quite rapidly after 2017 and continued to be high until the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And since then, again, attention has picked up. And some of this surge in recent interest was initially triggered by some landmark scientific publications. So here is one paper which was published in 2015, which quantified the scale and scope of marine plastic litter. And then that was followed by another paper which looked at the entire life cycle of plastics, looking at production, use, and end of life of plastics. And that was a very ambitious study as well. But after that, there were a number of other things. For example, this documentary called Blue Planet, which brought home the consequences of plastic pollution to marine life. And then that was followed by a whole range of policy initiatives. It started with import bans of plastic waste in China, which spread to many other countries in the region. And also a number of countries, both developed countries, but also emerging economies, banned several single-use plastic items in their jurisdictions. And then, of course, we were hit with the COVID-19 pandemic, which took attention away from the plastics problem, as it did for many other environmental issues. But the problem of plastic waste linked to things like face masks garnered a lot of attention. And of course, now we are in 2022, which has led to the launch of the process to start negotiations for a plastics treaty. And just last week, the first session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee was concluded. So that's a brief history of the attention to plastic pollution. Now, within this broad landscape, we have these 2 volumes of the Global Plastics Outlook, which were released this year, but are the culmination of research over the last 4 years or so. And the Global Plastics Outlook is the first comprehensive mapping of the life cycle of plastics globally. It has a high level of granularity. So we are looking at both primary and secondary production of plastics. We're looking at 14 different polymers. We're looking at macroplastics and microplastics. And we are looking at a whole range of end-use applications of the plastics. We also quantify leakage of plastics, not only to the oceans, but also to rivers and other water bodies, to land, and also to the atmosphere. We then also do a stock take of policies countries around the world have to address plastic pollution. And then we make projections of plastics use, waste, and leakage to 2060. And finally, we develop policy scenarios to reduce and eliminate leakage of plastic waste. So with that broad context of these 2 volumes, let me now get down to the key findings from the Plastics Outlook. So this is the situation up to now. Industrial plastics production started after the Second World War, and it has grown to 460 million tons by the end of 2019. Now, you can see that there were small dips in plastics production in the wake of the global financial crisis of 2009, and again with the COVID-19 pandemic in 2019. But in both cases, that dip in production resumed fairly quickly to business as usual growth rates. And that has been the case again in 2020, 2021 following the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, what does 460 million tons mean? It's the weight of roughly 45,500 Eiffel Towers. The growth in plastics production has been 40% faster than growth in GDP between 2000 and 2019. And the plastics problem is also linked to the climate problem, and the plastics life cycle contributes 1.8 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions annually. And there are great disparities in plastics use, both across countries in the world and also within countries. But here, just to give you aggregate numbers, the plastics consumption is 156 kilograms per capita per year in the OECD and 39 kilograms per capita per year in the non-OECD countries. Now, this is the story about plastics production. The other part of the problem is plastics waste. And plastics waste amounted to 353 million tons in 2019. And plastic waste generation also doubled between 2000 and 2019. 40% of the plastics waste comes from packaging with lifetimes of less than 6 months. Another 12% comes from consumer products, which have lifetimes of less than 3 years. Another 11% from textiles with lifetimes of less than 5 years. And the rest comes from other applications which have longer lifetimes. So that's the picture, but roughly 60% of the waste generation is from applications of lifetimes less than 5 years. Now, so this is the point I've already made. The other point I'd like to make is that the plastics life cycle is currently only 8% circular. So of the waste that we generate, only 8% ultimately gets recycled and makes it back as secondary plastics into the economy. Now, this is the full mapping of the plastics life cycle in 2019. So we had 460 million tons of plastics use, of which fossil fuel-based plastics were the very large majority, 429 million tons. And primary plastics, again, were the primary source of plastics production. Secondary plastics were very, very small, only 29 million tons. This is the picture in terms of plastic waste. We had 353 million tons of waste. Almost half of it was landfilled, 174 million tons. 67 million tons was incinerated, and only 55 million tons was collected for recycling. But then we had some losses during recycling, and ultimately 29 million tons came back into the economy as secondary plastics. The category we worry most about is mismanaged and littered plastic waste, and that amounted to 82 million tons in 2019. And that mismanaged waste had several channels. Some of it made its way through aquatic leakage, terrestrial leakage, open pit burning contributing to air pollution, or illegal dump sites, and that's 34 million tons. And then we also had a very small category of leakage from marine activities like fishing gear and so on, 0.3 million tons. And then we had leakage of microplastics from the use phase of the plastics, 2.7 million tons. So that's the leakage of plastics in the environment. And let's focus on this category a bit more. So if we look at aquatic leakage, we had 6 million tons of aquatic leakage of plastics, and a large share went into rivers. Now, some of it went into rivers and ultimately ended up in the ocean, and that's 1.7 million tons. But a lot of the plastics are also sinking in riverbeds, and our estimations are that almost 3 million tons of plastics were sinking in river and lake beds in 2019. And the accumulated stock of plastics in rivers and lakes is, according to our estimates, is 109 million tons. And then we look at the oceans, where the accumulated stock of plastics in the oceans is 30 million tons. Now, if you look at the future, our projections indicate that plastics use is on course to almost triple by 2060. So we had 460 million tons in 2019, and we are projecting under business as usual 1 million tons by 2060. And And that growth is across all regions, although in OECD countries, we are projecting a doubling. And it's much more than a doubling in other parts of the world. For example, in India, we are projecting a 5.5-fold increase in plastics use by 2060. In what is called other Africa, which is essentially sub-Saharan Africa, we are projecting an increase by a factor of 6.5. Now, if you look at 2040, which is a target to stop plastic pollution for the High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution, we are projecting that we will have 766 million tons of plastics produced for the 2040 timeframe. Now, if you look at waste, we are also projecting a tripling of plastic waste. And we also project that half of it will still be landfilled in the absence of more aggressive policies. So that's the trajectory of plastics waste generation, 353 million tons in 2019, over 1 billion tons in 2060. And if you're looking at 2040 timeframe, we're talking 600 million tons, a little more than that. And that's the breakdown. So we project, the good news is that the share of plastic waste, which will be mismanaged, would decline from 22% to 15%, but there is a net increase in absolute terms. Landfilling remains almost constant, as does the percentage of plastic waste which is going to be incinerated. And in terms of recycled plastics, we are projecting an increase in share from 9% currently to almost 17% by 2060. So now the question is, okay, how far would we be in 2060 from zero plastic pollution? And here, the answer depends upon how you define plastic pollution. So if we're looking at leakage to the environment, which is the most narrow definition, we are projecting that there'll be 44 million tons of plastics still leaking into the environment by 2060. If you're looking at mismanaged of plastics in dump sites and open pit burning, that adds up to 115 million tons per year. Then if we look at stocks in aquatic environments alone, which have accumulated over time, almost 500 million tons of plastic stocks would exist by 2060. Then if we are looking at greenhouse gas emissions, we are projecting 4.3 gigatons per year by 2060. And then we have other life cycle impacts on land use, human toxicity, and so on, which we are projecting to double from 2019 levels. So the plastics pollution problem is a lot bigger than leakage to the ocean. And how far we are from zero plastic pollution depends in part on how we define plastic pollution. We also did this stock take of 50 countries around the world in terms of what kind of policy frameworks do they have currently to stop leakage to the environment. So only 13 countries of this set of 50 countries we looked at incentivize waste sorting at source. 25 have policy instruments to incentivize recycling, but the share of population that they cover is much smaller, only a few percent of the population of the countries we're looking at. 33 countries have national regulations and operational schemes for extended producer responsibility. And a large number of countries, not just in the 50 we looked at, but also globally, have put in place bans and taxes on certain single-use plastic items. But these cover a very small part of the waste stream. And most countries do not have adequate incentives in place to reduce the demand for plastics and to improve product design. So what is a roadmap towards ending plastic leakage? And we propose a three-pronged approach for countries which don't even have proper waste management infrastructure, and that includes not only developing countries, but also key emerging economies. A key priority is to close the leakage pathways by investing in collection and disposal infrastructure and putting a ban or tax on frequently littered items. But we need to move further upstream and create incentives for recycling and sorting at source. This is through schemes like extended producer responsibility, landfill and incineration taxes, deposit refund schemes, and so on. But the ultimate goal for all countries is to restrain demand and to design for circularity. And this is where, again, bans or taxes on single-use plastics can play an important role. We need to address fossil fuel subsidies and try to remove them. We need to clean up the plastics value chain because we can't have circularity if there are dangerous chemicals which are part of the plastics value chain. Imposing recycled content standards, modulating extended producer responsibility fees so that they provide incentives for design for circularity. So that's the roadmap that we produced. And then we tried to implement this roadmap in many different ways. And our most ambitious scenario is a globally coordinated, ambitious policy scenarios. And according to that scenario, we can actually virtually eliminate plastic leakage to the aquatic environment by 2060. So in the baseline scenario, this is the picture we have in 2060, 1.23 billion tons of plastics in use. If we implement this policy package, that'll reduce to 830 million tons. The share of recycled plastics would go up from 144 million tons in the baseline to 340 million tons. If you look at waste, waste would reduce from over 1 billion tons in 2060 to 680 million tons. But the most dramatic impact of our policy package is in the category of mismanaged plastic waste, which goes down from 153 million tons to 6 million tons. And a large share of that is microplastics, which are much harder to eliminate. So it is possible to virtually eliminate leakage if we put in place a whole of life cycle policy package and we implement it in a globally coordinated manner. But it requires policies to reduce demand, increase recycling, extend useful life, and eliminate mismanaged waste. Now, we also looked at the costs of this policy package. The overall costs would be of the order of 0.8% of global GDP, but there is significant heterogeneity in costs. So for example, if you look at what is other Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, those costs would be as high as almost 3% of GDP. So clearly there is an imperative for putting in place financing mechanisms to facilitate the transition, particularly in developing and emerging economies. So let me just conclude with some final takeaways from our analysis. Plastic leakage to the environment can be drastically reduced at modest costs overall from a global perspective, but eliminating leakage requires global action on all aspects of the plastics life cycle to restrain demand, enhance circularity, and close leakage pathways. And costs as a share of GDP will be higher for many developing countries, but we must also bear in mind that even if leakage flows are eliminated, the stocks of accumulated plastics in rivers and oceans will still double. So we need flanking efforts to tackle cleanup of plastic waste as well. We also need more granularity in policy discussions on plastics. We need to look at applications, different polymers, different stages of the life cycle. And at the same time, we need to broaden the locus of plastics pollution, not just marine litter, but also looking at rivers, pollution on land, air quality, and greenhouse gas emissions. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
はい、シャドゥールさんどうもありがとうございました。非常に細部のにわたる報告書。
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive report, especially on the economic and policy fronts. Various initiatives will be required, and thank you very much for pointing out what we will have to do in the future. The good news is that if we can work together globally, we can solve this issue. And another point is that we need ambitious action. And in developing nations, the cost could be larger. Some countries may have bigger burden, so it's important to support developing nations. Thank you very much for your presentation. And we welcome questions from the audience in the Q&A box. Next, from the Environmental Restoration and Conservation Agency, we had a recommended presenter who is a researcher. The researcher will talk about the latest situation in this field, as well as the presenters will also talk about what kind of policy recommendation and intervention will be required. First, I'd like to ask Professor of Tokai University.
Thank you so much
Professor Toka,
for the
please.
introduction. Good afternoon and good evening. I am Tokai from the Tokyo University of Marine Science and Technology. Allow me to share my slides with you. First of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And in my presentation, I intend to focus on the projects I have been involved in over the past 8 years and present some of the research results. This graph shows the rapid increase in the number of academic papers by showing how many hits you get when you use microplastics and marine plastics as a keyword in the search field. We can see that the number of papers started to increase around 2020, reflecting how the accumulation of scientific knowledge over the past 10 years is conspicuous. Now, in the early days, only the plastic litter and small pieces of plastic on and very close to the coast was addressed. In Japan, too, in the early 2010s, research on plastic pellets washed ashore on the coast and persistent POPs, adhering to them as being conducted by Professor Tanaka of the Tokyo University of Agriculture and Tokyo Technology. And also Professor Isobe of Kyushu University began research on the microplastic floating on the surface or near the coast. However, in the coastal area of Japan, even after collecting and disposing the plastic waste, they kept washing ashore. So the next step is what to do about that. So I, since around 2005, have used training voyages of ships belonging to the university to conduct research on estimating the amount of microscopic plastic waste on the surface of the sea. And since the beginning of 2014, using these training ships, I started the research on the visual observation of microscopic plastic litter drifting around Japan, as well as a true survey of seafloor plastic litter, and also using a tunnel net to collect the microplastics. And currently, we have nearly 100 observation points around Japan every year for these observations. I believe this is a measurement system which is unique in the world. And as a result, it was found that there is a large amount of microplastic floating on the sea surface of the coast of Japan. And the average density is about 16 times that of the North Pacific Ocean and 77 times that of the world average. But however, this new stone net is unable to collect microplastics smaller than 1 millimeters. The mesh size is only 350 micrometers, so smaller than 1 millimeter microplastic pellets will pass through the mesh. So we have attempted to investigate the distribution of microplastics and their impact on ecosystem in more detail on the coastal and offshore areas and on the entire globe. So from 2015 to 2017 and from 2018 to 2020, together with Professor Isobe and Professor Takada and I began conducting 2 research projects. Now, first, in the first project, microplastics from the coast to the ocean, and from the second phase, global scale transport of plastics, the impact of POPs adhering to microplastics on ecosystems, and more microscopic microplastics in the marine environment with Professor Isobe and also with Professor Takada. We started collecting plastics not only on the surface, but on the seabed, and also using the monitoring drone and others to enhance the monitoring technologies. We have 4 results on the impact on ecosystems. So the microplastics and microbeads were also found in the stomach contents of the anchovies. And in an experiment where we introduced microplastics to the medaka or killfish, they accumulated in the digestive tract but were excreted within 24 hours. And however, though, 2 micrometer polystyrene particles tended to remain in the body. Now, this is a net, so this is army, so those are mice to their predators. Scalping was confirmed. And also, the additives in the plastics accumulate in the bodies of seabirds and accumulate in their tissues. So large particles are no problem because they're excreted. But when it comes to very fine particles, they tend to remain in the body, and this indicates possibility of bioaccumulation through the food chain. However, in the nature, various types of particles exist, such as from dust from volcanoes, and still unknown as to how the bodies of living organisms react to all of those. Now, from the coastal areas to the offshore, we collected microplastics in the Western Pacific Ocean from Japan to the Antarctic Ocean. And we also unfortunately found the microplastics in the Antarctic Ocean, and we published a peer-reviewed scientific paper for the first time in the world on this issue. Microplastics are floating in oceans everywhere on Earth. Now, based on these observations and other data, future predictions of microplastics drifting on the surface of Pacific oceans were made. If this continues, by 2030, the concentration can double, and by 2040, it will almost quadruple. Now, this leads us to project that these are highly concentrated and harmful to the marine biology will be accumulated, more volume will be accumulated. So that means that we must somehow slow the release of plastic debris into the ocean. As I stated earlier, now in order to collect small microplastics, a new stone net with a fine mesh over 50 micrometers on the outside is being developed because the current model cannot do that. Using this new type of new stone net, we are able to research into the concentration of the fine MPs. So it's about 20,000 times higher than we originally believed. And we has also became clear that the microplastic waste also accumulates on the ocean floor. And in the 2015 survey, we found at the depths of 919 meters, we found some of the microplastic debris. For example, in a survey conducted in 2015, 1918 expiry date was printed on the bag of sweet buns collected from the seafloor. That means that this particular plastic bag sat on the seafloor for 34 years. Now, by recovering these microplastics would be nearly impossible given the energy cost. So that means it should be collected with microplastic garbage, then sorted out later. But on the other hand, we still are not clear how much plastic waste is accumulated on the seabed and what happens to it. So I think that's our next challenge in the next research. So for the amount of litter washed ashore, a system was built to estimate its volume from images taken by drones and analyze those colors and forms by application of deep learning. Now, this system has been demonstrated in some of the municipalities in Japan and now are beginning to be used in overseas, in Thailand, for instance. Now, when we estimate the amount of plastic waste on the sea surface, based on the observation from the Professor Isobe, again, the amount of plastic waste on the sea surface, the results show that the actual amount is extremely limited, and that means that we expect much of the unmanaged plastic waste is still on the land. Only 2.8% is floating on the ocean, and the rest is washed ashore or has been degraded to the point and they have become invisible. So the Professor Isobe's group is estimating that the amount of plastic waste that has drifted ashore, or smaller plastics, or that nets cannot collect. The Professor Isobe's group is beginning to research into that. I plan to pursue those plastics that sunk to the bottom of the sea And there, we need to estimate the amount of microscopic plastic waste on the seabed, as well as what kind of conditions they are in. Microplastics and marine plastic litter research still has a short history, and we lack standard methods. The Ministry of Environment held an international expert meeting, and they created and published guidelines to harmonize monitoring surveys for microplastics floating on the sea surface, and this will make it easier to compare all the survey results. And through this research, we would like to share the insights and experience and technologies to researchers in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. I believe that is very needed right now. And also, we would like to build a database that can be used by researchers all over the world. And through this, we should be able to generate more accurate predictions and effective policy proposals for reducing marine plastic litter. That is all from me. And thank you so much for listening. Professor Tokai, thank you so much for that. In the INC held last week, they touched upon how important it is to compile all the scientific data and scientific knowledge. And also, as you mentioned, you have to identify where, either on the surface or on the seabed, the microplastics are accumulating. So for the monitoring and evaluation, as you pointed out, the global cooperation is very important. And I believe this is an area Japan has a lot to offer. So thank you so much. Next, from Suzuki-san from the National Institute for Environmental Science. Also, his presentation will be from the scientific point of view.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'd like to share my screen now. Now I'd like to begin my presentation.
So today I would like to talk about my topic in Japanese. I'm sorry. I hope I can share our efforts with you. 国立環境研究所の鈴木です。本発表では、マイクロプラスチックの発生抑制に向けた国立
So
環境
today I'm going to talk about NIE's effort toward microplastic prevention. This is the agenda. I will talk about the background and then introduce efforts by NIE's. As for the background, as Dr. Agrawala and Professor Tokai said, the context and the background is already clear, so I will be brief on that. And there was a presentation on OECD report earlier. We are referring to the report as we make effort. In 2019, the report said that the 460 million tons of plastic was produced. And plastic waste, 353 million tons of plastic waste was generated in 2019, which includes the packaging and daily products as well as textile. Out of this, globally, only 9% of plastic waste is recycled, and 19% 19% burned, and 50% landfilled, and 22% is inappropriately managed and treated and is leaking to the environment. So the plastic waste that is leaking into the environment is estimated to be 22 million tons. And out of this, 6.1 million tons is flowing into the aquatic environment, 1.7 million tons is reaching the ocean. And what's noteworthy is that the plastic waste that is flowing into the environment because of the inappropriate management and treatment is flowing into the ocean, which is accumulating in the environment. And so the prevention is required at the source of the plastic waste, and then we need to consider how to treat the plastic waste that is becoming a stock in the environment. So I'm going to talk about the key research activities that are conducted in NIE's. We are currently looking at the research to prevent the generation of plastic waste in an efficient and effective manner, looking at the life cycle of plastic. We are using material flow analysis as well as risk management of the chemicals, and we are also researching the risks to ecosystem and human health, as well as plastic management on 3R+. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 initiatives on plastic waste monitoring and emission control. The Ministry of the Environment is promoting the commonization of the sampling and analysis methods that will allow the comparison of measurement data, and the guideline on the measurement of plastic waste on microplastic has been published, as well as the case study. And especially when it comes to the ocean surface microplastic, in June 2020, the English version guideline was published. And river microplastic guideline will be translated into English by the end of this fiscal year. River microplastic survey guideline was published in Japanese in June 2021. NIS is commonizing the survey methods based on the guideline and carrying out the survey on the emission, and currently validating the effectiveness of the emission control, and also conducting joint research with local environmental research institutions around the country. So far, as a part of this initiative, we have conducted demonstrations on sampling as well as measurement. In the sampling demonstration, we had a hands-on workshop on monitoring method, and on the measurement demonstration, we conducted the streaming program online and explained the method and accepted questions. Through the demonstration, we recorded the session, and also photos were taken, and sampling, collection, treatment, and plastic analysis were compiled into electronic movie manual. I apologize. I apologize. So through the commonization, we are creating these movies and videos. And we found that river surface microplastic concentration is higher compared to the surface water in the ocean. And just like marine microplastic, the presence of polyethylene and polypropylene was high. And also, most of it was supposedly coming from artificial turf. So based on this result, I believe that this will be a useful data set in considering the emission condition, as well as validating the emission control effect. In Japan, in 2022 April, the Act on Plastic Resource Circularity Promotion was enacted, so the administration and private sector are working on reducing plastic waste. So going forward, we'd like to work on the research on the microplastic emission and continue to propose efficient and effective countermeasures. Next, on the fate and behavior during recycling. As a part of the policy approach to reduce plastic waste, OECD report is proposing recycling action to be promoted. So the most widely adopted technology for recycling waste is currently mechanical recycling, and the process includes collection, sorting, crushing, cleaning, and pelleting. And in the crushing and pelleting processes, water is discharged. So microplastic is probably generated through the crushing step. So based on this hypothesis, we looked into the microplastic generation through the mechanical recycling. We conducted this research on Vietnam because it is considered to be the country with highest plastic leakage into the environment because of the inappropriate management treatment of plastic waste. So we looked at the process of plastic products such as PET bottles and buckets and other daily products recycling facility to sample the microplastics and measured the amount. And we detected the microplastic, which is fragmented in the water discharged from the factory. And this microplastic is considered to be coming from a water sewage and water treatment facility. And also the water discharge amount was the same as the water coming from a sewage facility. And the point is that the plastic is discharged into the environment with high concentration, and as a result, it may be serving as a hot spot of microplastic. So microplastic emission is happening without the wastewater treatment. So we'd like to continue assessing the situation of discharge into the environment through recycling, and would like to work on the control measures. The third is on the fate and behavior in the environment. The plastic waste is now accumulating in the stock. The amount is bigger than the plastic flowing into the environment. So it is important to assess the behavior and fate in order to take appropriate measures. NIS is working with Industrial Association to assess the fragmentation and degradation of plastic. And we believe this is an important case to look at the ocean plastic waste. So first, in order to look at the current situation, we sampled the ocean surface plastics and looked at the degradation state and assessed the additives. And some plastics were degrading earlier than others. And also additives included some adhesives or some plastic materials, and it is retained in the environment. So we have conducted the UV ray testing and external exposure testing to conduct the fragmentation testing of the degraded plastic. And by so doing, we assessed the microplastics degradation state based on the additives. And we want to continue working on this to reveal the importance of the source of microplastic in the plastic waste in the environment. So there are some research topics from NIS on nanoplastic. On standard particles, we are unable to purchase the analysis equipment, so we have developed some manufacturing method on some materials, and we would like to continue revealing the importance of nanoplastic evaluation going forward using this mass analysis. Second is on the physical aspect of the microplastics. Microplastics may have different characteristics depending on the degrading state in the environment. So NIS is trying to capture the situation of plastics in the environment as well as its physical and chemical state, and then conduct the risk assessment to reveal the characteristics of microplastic that should be worked on first. And so we were supported by these organizations. And also our projects were funded by some grants and subsidies. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the supporters. That is all from my side. Thank you very much. Suzuki-san, I think there are 2 points that are worth noting. In Nice, especially the land base and source are becoming the important issues. So the sources, the flowing path, and how the plastic is degrading, that is the focus of the research. I believe there's a big interest in that area. And the second point is, when it comes to this issue in the UN and other international fora, it is considered as a environment and chemical issue in between the 2 issues. But indeed, what you talked about is exactly in between the waste and the chemical issue. And I think it was very clear to see that. Thank you very much. So we have concluded the first section to understand the overview of this issue, why this issue is worth noting, and why this issue requires international collaboration. So we have heard from the 2 research groups. So from now, well, my colleague, Aoki-san, went to the international negotiating meeting in Uruguay. She just came back this morning, so Aoki-san is going to make a presentation. She might be tired from the trip, but she's going to introduce to us what kind of discussion took place, and I'd like to use that as a basis of our discussion.
Hello, thank you for introduction. That's right, I just got back this morning and my head is still in the fog a little bit, but I hope I can at least introduce some of the main points that came out of the conference last week. I would like to share my screen with you. So here we go, thank you. So I would like to report on the so we are talking about the including the marine environment. So this was the first session on the intergovernmental negotiating committee to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. So this was held in a large venue in Puerto del Este in Uruguay. So this was the venue from the outside, and on next to that was what it looked like in the venue. So in this main venue, they had to put some restrictions on entering the venue because of the pandemic, but as well as we had more people actually attending in person to this conference, so they had to arrange a ad hoc room called the overflow room. So I think this demonstrated how each country and each party had so much interest in this issue. And I was basically in this overflow room. And the meeting started on the November 26th with the multi-stakeholder forum, NGOs and scientists and the policymakers, and also the delegation from the countries will have dialogues. And the core of the meeting started on November 20th. And you can see on the bottom of the slide, we talked about what are the sub-items that should be included in the agenda going forward. So we shared the statement from the delegates and also the official opinions from the other nations. And we try to identify and we all try to share where we have to focus going forward in the next round, so to speak. So we didn't really come away with a decision or the consensus, but I want to talk about, what were at the center of the discussion. As the professors pointed out, the impact on the health and also the impact on the environment from leakage. People are very much interested about that. And in relation to that, they were also interested in the climate change issues. And especially from the developing countries, they wanted all of us to consider this issue from the human rights. And especially we focused on the single-use plastics and also the problematic plastics, with more toxic substance inside and also the micro and the nano plastics. Now, how we are going to make this into a convention where each country can agree. We wanted to make sure that the all countries can participate and regardless of national circumstances, context, and capacity and flexibility. But we all said that how voluntary approach will not be able to finish this because we need some global standard. And on the other hand, they said CBDR, so this is common but the differentiated responsibilities basically means that the each country with the degree of the contribution to the pollution, they should measure the level of involvement and also the engagement towards solving this issue. So this table shows you in more details what type of capacity building programs or what type of monitoring that we have to look at. So some very detailed specific agenda items. And of course, we talked about the scope, right? Basically, they said the scope includes beginning or the birth of the plastic all the way to when it's disposed of. And in terms of the impact, look at the human health and also the environment. And when you monitor the human health and the environmental impact, we didn't quite get to the standard or the rules of how to monitor that. But for the in terms of the how or in what form people participate, we also many people voiced how there should be actual rules and ground rules, if you will, that the people participate and how they contribute to the future meetings. So especially from the developing countries and island nations, basically this is what we call the downstream measures. So a circular economy policy with waste management and also managing the plastic leakage is of the utmost importance. And also the country level reporting and support are requested from the developing countries. So the question will be how we will promote the international cooperation part while giving the adequate support to the developing countries. And also when it comes to the monitoring and national level reporting, what type of data do we collect and to what extent or what level or the granularity of the data that we should collect. And that is where the scientific insight, as the professors pointed out, will be very important. And those will be based on the policy formulation in the other countries. And I think that's where where we have the huge opportunity for global cooperation. I believe time is running out. So this is all I share with you today. Thank you, Aoki-san. I just want to clarify one thing since we have you here because I am the chairman, I can do that. First one is that when I read the written report, there were many countries, to me, seems that there are many countries who emphasize the life cycle approach. Why is that? What policies, what regulations? Were there any specific opinions about that in the INC? Actually, we didn't quite get to that level of details, but we all said the full life cycle. So we are talking about the source of the microplastics. So again, some countries talked about how we have to create rules and regulations to reduce the amount of the virgin plastic. And in addition to that, there were arguments about how we can control the additives. Then with that, there's design requirements and reducing the problematic plastics. And again, we sort of went around the circle and came back to the opinion of how we have to really focus on the waste management. Thank you so much for that. We have some questions. I'm sure we'll come back to you at the end of in the Q&A session. Next, when it comes to the, what stakeholders are doing, to what extent, and what kind of international cooperation we need is the subject of the next topic. First, we would like to invite Mizutani-san from the Environment Ministry and what Japan is doing. And I'm sure that you have been leading a lot of those initiatives domestically and also in the global arena. We would like Mizutani-san to shed some light on what they have been doing. Thank you so much. I am Mizutani from the Ministry of Environment of Japan from the Regeneration and Resource Circulation Bureau. I would like to take about 5 minutes of your time and introduce to you what the Japanese government is doing in this topic is focusing on the domestic measures. So this is the plastic resource recycling declaration. So in the Osaka's G20, Japan was the chair country for that. And marine plastic problem was one of the main agenda items. So reflecting that, the Osaka Blue Ocean Vision. So that means the, make the plastic, marine plastic litter to zero by 2050. And this is what the Aoki-san talked about, the marine plastic convention and a basis for that. So the government put together some of the measures and policies. And this table shows you the, at a glance, view of that. So we have 6 milestones on the right-hand side. This is quite ambitious. So 2025, 2030, and to 2035, all the way to 2050, we have various objectives and targets that we would like to hit. And on this page, the regular session of the diet last year, this is the plastic resource recycling act. And specific measures are written on the bottom half of this slide. So that's guidelines for design for the environment, reduction of single-use plastics. So this is the overall plastic life cycle, and the government act encompasses all of that. I think that is quite noteworthy. Up until now, under the another act, there was a scheme to separate and collect and separate only the PET bottles and other microplastic made containers. So in terms of combating the climate change and the ocean microplastics, and also includes the limiting the or the banning import of the plastic or the plastic waste into China. On the next slide. The first one is that when it comes to the design and the manufacturing stage, so this is the Society for Environmentally Friendly Products. This is a government certification program, and they want to make sure that they can choose manufacturers from that. And this targets all of the plastic-related products manufacturers. And so the design businesses and also the manufacturers, many guidelines as for structures, reduce plastic as much as you can. Packaging must be simplified and look for long use and for materials other than the plastic materials and also that are easily degraded. So those are bioplastics. And also they were recommending using papers and wood-based products in place of plastic. And also the bioplastics or recycled plastic are also part of the guideline. Based on these guidelines, life cycle of the plastic materials will be assessed. So again, across all of the life cycle of plastic, the guideline tells you how to evaluate the impact of the plastic. So based on these guidelines, the country can certify products that are superior in these according to these guidelines compared to the others. And right now, the Ministry of Trade is working with the Ministry of Environment to identify what specific products that we have to make part of this program. And on this next page, so this is the sales and provision or offer stage. The single-use plastic or disposable plastic is the topic under this guideline, and how we can accelerate or streamline the use of this. 12 different items have been identified. So on top, so those are single-use cutleries used in convenience stores and restaurants. In the middle tier, those are the amenities used in hotels, including hairbrushes and combs. And on the third tier, those are the cleaning industry, including plastic hangers and clothes covers. So those 12 items were identified under this guideline and this act. And we are going to mandate using of this act, so that we can reduce the use of plastic and also promote moving towards using paper and wood-based products. So basically, we're talking about the businesses using more than 5 tons of plastic per year. There will be administrative warnings and also fines and penalties if they do not alter their ways. And third is the discarding, collection and recycling phase. So first we looked at the household waste. So again, we were only recommending to use the recycling scheme for the plastic containers, but now the act includes the other plastic products that used to be part of the regular trash be incinerated, and also the industrial waste. We focused on the appropriate process, but this act recommends or mandates everyone to move towards a 3R scheme. So up until now, this is a plastic, but for the general public, they couldn't quite figure out, is this a plastic that we can recycle, or is this a plastic we have to throw away? So with this act, we want to make sure to make separating of those plastic products easier. And with that, we should be able to recycle more plastic as part of our resources. So this is my presentation on the overview of this new act. And as you know, this has been acted This has taken effect starting this April, and many municipalities have begun their own initiatives according to this. So the fast food chains and the convenience store chains, and also the airlines have started changing plastic cutleries and other plastic amenities into paper-based products. So for the part of the government, just because we acted this act, this is not the end for us. We still have to look at the budget side of this act, and also we have to make sure that we support the general public and municipalities through the budgetary measures to support those communities and general public to implement this. Now, the certification, the system, the city of Sendai had the first the business certified under this act, and we believe we will have more of these businesses and the products will be certified. We'll make a nice of the actual case studies. Again, the Japanese government with this new act, not just the plastic containers, but plastic as resources, all of the plastic, we will look at the entire life cycle of any and all plastic is one of the pivotal aspect of this. So again, by 2035 or 2050, and also in the INC, we expect the INC to take leadership in the coming to a consensus and the ratifying this type of a convention. I rushed through my presentation. I apologize. Mizutani-san, thank you so much. I can see that Japan is trying to lead the way in the dealing with the entire life cycle of plastic to reduce waste and also use them as resources. Now, when I visit Southeast Asia, though, I get the impression that the same type of measures and programs are progressing quite nicely in these areas too. Thank you so much for that. Next. So from the Southeast Asia and ASEAN from the Southeast Asia, so from the Ellen-san, she has compiled some of the initiatives and the programs that the businesses have engaged in. So Ellen-san will introduce us to that. Ellen-san, please.
Thank you so much, Hoda-san. I would like to share my screen. I hope it's showing now. Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am Ellen Putredita. I am the research associate at the Regional Knowledge Center for Marine Plastic Debris at the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. Today I will present about the business perspectives and efforts regarding the expectation and challenges for international cooperation to tackle plastic pollution. I only have 5 minutes approximately, so I hope I can make it. Before going further into my presentation, I would like to briefly introduce about our center first, because it will give the background to my later presentation about the business initiative. So our center, the Regional Knowledge Center for Marine Plastic Debris, is a branch under area research department, and it was established back in 2019 to support the ASEAN +3 member states to combat the marine plastic debris. And we have the goal to create the network, to raise awareness, to promote innovative actions, as well as to facilitate regional and national cooperation. And our center so far has been working with a lot of stakeholders, and one of them is the private sector. Here I want to highlight about the private sector. our center is doing partnership with the private sector. So we created an online platform that aims to highlight and promote the efforts by the private sector to reduce the plastic waste. If you can go to our website rkcmpd-area.org and choose private sector platforms. From that section, you can find many stories have been shared by the private sectors to reduce the plastic waste. And so far, we already have 72 published stories on our website coming from 6 different countries, such as Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and many more. Yes, we also have the engagement with the private sector. We held several seminars in several countries in ASEAN. And the last time we held a seminar in Cambodia in August this year. Yes, like I mentioned, we have a lot of stories shared on our website, but I cannot, discuss them all. I want to highlight some of the private sector efforts to reduce the plastic waste. The first category I want to discuss is about the biodegradable alternatives to plastics. So there are several companies from Japan doing the efforts to substitute the plastic into more biodegradable alternatives. For instance, from Asahi Group Holdings, they created a mug from cornstarch that is edible. And they also created a tumbler from the cellulose fiber from the timber. And we also have the stories from Indonesian company called Green Hope, where they produce the plastic bags from cassava. Next is the green packaging. Here you can observe that there is a Japanese company called Fuji Mineral Water, where they produce mineral water packed in a carton, so it's not from the plastic bottle. And they, with that efforts, they can reduce the plastic up to 75%. And if you can see in the right bottom part of my screen, there's a company called Hoko Corporation where they produce cardboard containers. So the customers do not need to use straw when they drink, so they can directly drink from the containers. And the containers itself is made from the cardboard. We are also highlighting some stories from the company that is providing services to find the microplastics. For instance, from Tokyo QA, they quantify drifted plastics along the coastline using the drone technology. And there's a company from Japan called Pirika, where they provide the litter mapping service. So there's an app that we can use to know how much the plastic that is captured from our photos or video, and then it can also show what types of plastics that is captured in the photo. Next, there are also some companies highlighted on our website that are doing the waste management services, such as Recosystem. It's a company, Indonesian company, where they help the customers to pick up the waste, and they help the customers to distribute the waste to the recycling companies. And the company from Cambodia called Gaia Waste Management, they help the customers to collect, dispose, and recycle the waste. Yes, just some key takeaways from my presentations. So it's very great that now we observed a lot of efforts performed by the private sectors to reduce the plastic waste. It is not only limited to CSR activities, but it is the part of their business. So it creates profit that makes the effort more sustainable in the future. And some challenges probably still exist. If we talk about the waste reduction and in the context of developing countries, probably they still have lack of infrastructures and high population, so that somehow such as the recycling facility is not does not exist in the rural area of the developing countries. So it's only centered in the urban area. And when we discuss about the biodegradable plastic, somehow the standard of biodegradability is different between one to another. And I think we still need a lot of forum or discussion that can collaborate, that can, facilitate the discussion between the government and the private sector themselves to create new business opportunities in the future. I think that will be all of my presentation. This is our website. You can go to our website and our social media. Thank you so much.
エレンさん、ありがとうございました。特にその
Thank you very much, Ellen. So it's not just about the utilization of technology, but rather how to create the business model is also important. And in order to achieve that, infrastructure needs to be put in place. So I think that is one of the key points.
Yep.
The takeaway from your presentation. So before our panel discussion, I'd like to call upon Ms. Leah Gajewski from Greenpeace Japan to make a presentation.
Let me just share my screen as well. Okay. First, I would like to thank IGES for the wonderful organization of this forum and express my gratitude to be able to attend this panel discussion, if we still have time for that. I'm very happy to be here. So Greenpeace is an international environmental NGO that is currently operating in over 55 countries and territories worldwide. We receive no funding from governments or corporations, only private donations to maintain a neutral and independent position. And by making proposals to governments and corporations, we are committed to realizing a safe and sustainable society for us and all future generations. So I would like to briefly touch upon the point of recycling. And according to the OECD report we've heard about earlier today, so far only 9% of all plastics disposed of have been recycled. And the rest is landfilled, incinerated, or ends up in the environment. And the amount of plastics being mismanaged exceeds the amount that is recycled. And in fact, only 2% of the world's plastic containers and packaging are effectively recycled. That means a closed loop recycling. And plastic containers and packaging, which account for 40% of all plastic production, are expected to increase up to fourfold by 2050. This is only worsening the status quo. And the situation is equally or similarly dire in Japan. So thermal recycling still accounts for more than 60% of plastic disposal and processing in Japan, while material recycling accounts for only 20%. Furthermore, nearly half of those 20%, or around 20%, is exported outside of Japan without any information on if or how it is being recycled. And this is a common problem. So developing countries continue to export large quantities of plastic waste to non-OECD countries. And in 2021, Japan was found to be the world's largest exporter of plastic waste, with more than 89% of it being sent to non-OECD countries. And these countries have largely poor waste management infrastructure. And furthermore, many of the exported plastics are mixed plastics or contaminated plastics that are difficult or impossible to be recycled in the first place. And this waste trade leads to environmental degradation, air, soil, and water contamination, as well as serious health hazards in the communities. And so after 30 years of recycling being marketed as the magical solution, kind of, we are still here sitting today and trying to solve this plastic crisis that is basically choking our planet. And so we need to take a hard look at how we currently produce, use, and dispose of plastics, and at the policies that are in place, and also the business models by corporations that are in place. And Greenpeace has been campaigning on this issue for a few years. One example is our recently published report, So we calculated for the first time the number of single-use cups that are annually disposed of by 9 major coffee chains here in Japan. And among those surveyed are, as you probably all know, chains like Starbucks or Tally's. And our results showed that the 9 coffee chains together are responsible for over 360 million cups being thrown away annually. Or to put that in perspective, the equivalent of the height of over 10,000 Mount Fujis. And the unnecessary use of disposable cups for dine and beverages is prevalent among the 3 highest emitters of disposable cups. Here, Starbucks, Tally's, and Pronto. And we calculated that switching to 100% reused cups for dine and beverages for all 9 surveyed chains would avoid more than 150 million cups from becoming waste. We also conducted a customer survey in September that showed that it is not the consumers who do not want change, but mainly large corporations who are still lacking ambition as of yet. And out of 1,000 people surveyed across Japan, 80% responded that they would want disposable cups to be reduced, and around 68% would like to use more reusable cups if offered by the store. So what is the solution? So we need to hold large polluters accountable. We need to restrict the production and use of plastics. We need to drastically reduce all unnecessary and harmful plastics and move away from our current throwaway culture to a more reuse and refill culture. We also need government and industry to refrain from exchanging one type of disposable packaging for another type of disposable packaging. This is just shifting one problem to another problem. And as plastics have become a global and transboundary crisis that is poisoning communities around the world, we also need a global answer to the problem in the form of a strong and ambitious plastics treaty. So we at Greenpeace Japan are calling to end the age of plastic. And as I was also attending the INC one last week, let me just end with a quote from Inga Anderson, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. She said that we need to show courage to listen to each other. We need to innovate, the courage to step out of our comfort zones, and the courage to lean in, the courage to embrace the future. And this is how we will end plastic pollution. So thank you very much.
はい、レアさんありがとうございました。もう時間がなくてですね、早速いくつか質問があるので、それに答える。
Thank you, Ria-san. We are running out of time. So we have some questions. So let's make that part of the panel discussion. So for Aoki-san, we have 2 questions. So how far did you go in terms of discussing the recommending substituting plastic products or the alternative ways? The other question is, was there a discussion similar to loss and damage discussion that took place in the COP27? Thank you for that question. So in terms of the substitute or alternative materials, so yes, there was a discussion as to coming up with an alternative material that replaces plastic altogether. But before that, they argued how we have to make plastic more sustainable. So, are we going to make that biodegradable? Are we going to replace those plastic containers with paper? The discussion didn't get to that. Now, there was no direct discussion similar to loss and damage, but the CBDR was an argument that was raised by the developing countries quite often. But either way, that discussion was, what to do about waste management. So I feel like there should be more discussion about how we can reduce those waste material at the source. Okay, so we are running out of time. I think this is for Shadur-san and Ria-san, OECD and Greenpeace respectively. What type of discussions were there at the INC for the international rules? So my question is, what type of or what kind of regulations and rules will be necessary? in the international arena. So Ria-san first, please.
If I understood the question correct, what kind of rules we need for a plastics treaty?
Yeah, so what kind of rules is important from your point of view? What kind of the regulation you foresee important to be implemented globally?
Yes, thank you very much. So important is definitely to reduce production and consumption of plastics from the very beginning. I also saw many countries, also from the High Ambition Coalition, to also approve or to also acknowledge that we need a cap of production and consumption of plastics, and we need to shift to reuse and refill alternatives. We also need a just transition, and we need to tackle plastic pollution in all environments and throughout the whole life cycle. As we don't have time, I don't want to go too deep into it, but give the stage to my fellow speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ria-san.
Shadul-san, do you
answer.
have any points on this? No? Oh, okay. So, もう時間なので、事務局の方
Okay,
から、
there was none. The project office is telling me to close this session because we really have run out of time, and this is my poor time management. But from the presentations, we were able to see that there were good initiatives and programs are taking place in the many different places in the world. Last, we would like to have some few words from the Director of Environmental Restoration and Conservation Agency, Mr. Yoshinori Tanaka. Hello, everyone. I am Tanaka Yoshinori. I am the Director of ERCA. For this session from Japan and Europe and Asia, people in the academia and also from the businesses and also from the public sector. And well, those were great presentations, and I believe your words were very inspiring, and you reported research results that are also inspiring and encouraging for the rest of us. And all of you who attended this session through Zoom, I would like to thank you for your attendance. I'd like to say a few things about what the ARCA or ERCA is doing. As Professor Tokai touched upon, in terms of the integrated research, we have the 5 billion yen budget. 1/5 of that goes to the plastic-related research. So about 30 projects so far. So we have about the annually 1 billion yen or thereabout support funding. So this is part of the national budget. So monitoring the condition of the plastic or the impact of the microplastic to the ecosystem. And other initiatives and programs, I hope, will be promoted in the industries. And also we have donations to 12 NGOs cleaning up the beaches or raising coral. We are engaged in distributing these funds to these NGOs and research projects. And starting next year, we are looking into promoting the strategy on a cross-ministerial format. So about the 2 billion yen with the collaboration between the academia and the private sector, and also the public sector. So in closing, session such as this, where many stakeholders share, their insights and the research results from a scientific point of view will be part of changing the society or transforming the society. And I hope that this will continue as the global collaborative project, and we would like to work together with IGES to help that come true. And I hope you will continue.
田中理事どうもありがとうございました。では本日のこの
in presentation today. Now, this concludes this session. I know there are questions we did not have time to answer, and it seems that the panelists have directly answered some of those questions, but we will post those questions on your session website, and we will answer all those questions. Again, thank you so much out of your busy schedule, taking time to do this, and those of you attending through the Zoom, I would like to thank you too.
いろんな議論が進んでおりますので。
Now, this is a topic that's progressing rapidly in terms of our discussion and the policy formulation. I'm sure there will be another webinar like this very shortly. So please join us again.